Welcome to Sustainability Bridges, a EUROSIF podcast aimed at building bridges between policymakers, investors, academics, and civil society around the theme of sustainable investing. EUROSIF is the leading pan-European association promoting sustainable finance and sustainable investing at the European level. In this podcast, the Executive Director of EUROSIF will invite distinguished guests for a 30-minute conversation on current events shaping the sustainable investing community.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aleksandra Palinska. I am the Executive Director of EUROSIF. For this episode, I am honored to be joined by Helena Viñes Fiestas, Commissioner of the Spanish Financial Market Authority. Together, we are going to discuss the evolution of the Sustainable Finance Regulatory Framework, leveraging on Helena's experience gathered through her involvement in the EU Platform on Sustainable Finance and the UN Secretary-General High-Level Expert Group on Net Zero Pledges. Dear Helena, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure.
Let's start with a question on the evolution of sustainable finance. You have worked on advancing sustainable finance framework in both public and private sector for more than 15 years. What is your opinion on the state of play of the EU Sustainable Finance Regulatory Framework, development and implementation? What do you think should come next?
Thank you, Aleksandra. I don't know if I ever told you, but I started in 2003 working part-time for F&C Investments. At the same time, I was volunteering at Global Witness. So I was in parallel for more than a year working in the city and in probably one of the most active NGOs that is Global Witness, an incredible experience. And I think at the time it would have appeared absolutely unthinkable to imagine that one day we would have a full-on strategy in Europe to transform the financial sector, and that strategy would become one of the key pillars of the strategy in turn of the European Commission and the European Union. Sometimes I like to make the parallel between the Paris Agreement and the EU Sustainable Finance Package, because both of them require a lot of advocacy, a lot of years behind, also campaigning in a certain way, a lot of boldness and highbrow thinking. But both of them, once they materialize, mark the beginning of the end of an era. For me, the Paris Agreement marked the beginning of the end of the economic model that based on fossil fuels, and started that transformation of that economic model and then moved towards carbon neutrality. In a way, the Sustainable Finance Package marked the end of the traditional financial system in Europe, right? And I do believe that many have not yet realized that the Sustainable Finance Roadmap, as it's called as well, DROMA, also draws exactly that, a roadmap for transforming the financial system. It's not only about, sometimes we concentrate too much on the market of ESG products or green finance. It's not only that, it is about the transformation of the entire financial system. And probably one of the biggest contributions it has made is the fact that it has included the entire financial value chain and that obligation of integrating ESG, environmental, social aspects, and governance in all throughout the value chain and for all the actors. Yes, it is about the contribution of the sector to the transition, but it's also about its transformation. And when we talk about climate change, it's about full decarbonization, the need to decarbonize credit and investment portfolios, and at the same time, trying to help and finance the products, services, and technologies that we need in order to reach, that carbon neutrality and more sustainable and inclusive, economic model. So these parallels, are, I think that is very interesting because both when it comes to the Paris Agreement, when it comes with the sustainable finance, we are in a phase of implementation, phase of advocacy. The high-level ideas is gone, and now it's time for really engaging with the industry, taking care of the details, amending what has worked, revising, tweaking, polishing, all that, that is a little bit more less attractive in a way, but at the end of the day, it is about making it work. And that includes developing the tools and facilitating the implementation. Just to give you an example, Aleksandra, I think it is also time to review the approved text of the different regulatory pieces that conform the sustainable finance package. I keep saying that I see it, the sustainable finance package also like a big jigsaw, where the central piece is a taxonomy, but all these pieces of this jigsaw have been developed, in parallel. So now we need to make them fit, right? Like in a puzzle. So we might need to polish them a little bit to enhance the consistency. And you've seen that, we've discussed it previously. There are sometimes a little bit of inconsistencies between the terminology, between some concepts. Sometimes it is about ensuring that we're talking about the same environmental metrics and methodologies and so forth. And I think that's what we have been concentrated quite a bit over the past, I think. And I'll finish by just saying that while that is true, that doesn't mean that there are still some areas that might require a little bit more regulatory work. I will mention just a couple, like the Article 8, that although, Article 8 registered products, that many people see it as a category of products, which is not. It's just a transparency. Yeah, if you register your product as 8, it just says what type of information you can expect. But it has created a lot of confusion within the market, the Article 8 and 9, and maybe we need to revise and set some minimum criteria. Yeah, I also think that it's time to regulate data providers and also to start looking at the non-green bonds or use of proceeds instruments. They call themselves transition bonds or sustainability linked.
Thank you so much. And speaking of actually complementing the framework, do you think there is also a need to further complement the EU taxonomy framework? Or do you think, as it is now, can play sufficient role in terms of enabling the transition towards a more sustainable economy?
It's a very good question, because I think that while I hope one day we finalize, the taxonomy in the sense of probably including the social taxonomy, also what I call the always significant harmful taxonomy, and the amber, I am a little bit cautious in terms of the timing. Let me explain. I think that now it is a time where we need to make sure that it works. What we have works. Definitely, we need Taxo 4, which is the taxonomy on the other environmental objectives. Yeah, so we have the climate taxonomy. Now we need for the rest of the environmental objectives. Absolutely. But then before going any farther in terms of making it, like including probably the social, and I said, expanding it to a potential traffic lights type, I think that we need to ensure that it works, and we need to make the necessary amendments so it really works, and we learn from that. And if we expand it, then we know exactly how. The reason, and there are several reasons, and you can find it, many of them, in the data and usability final report that we published in October. But some of them is because sometimes we forget the taxonomy is like a dictionary, and it has to be very granular and it has to be very specific, because it needs to provide sufficient guidance for someone who is going to conduct a project or upgrade a plant. Therefore, they need to know. But at the same time, it needs to be workable and flexible enough for applying to financial products, to someone who is sitting in an office and is looking at 10,000 companies at the same time. That gap that exists between one use and the other requires a lot of work, in the sense of guidance, in the sense of tools, in the sense of what works and what doesn't work. And that's where we are at. And I think that it is a good, sensible thing to pause, make it work, focus on the implementation, in January is going to start the first year of reporting alignment. And this is, massive companies, but also, financial product has already started. Yeah. Let's learn from that. Let's see what works not. Let's create the tools and then increase. In terms of expanding, personally, I have a weakness for the always significant harmful activities. And the reason is, and it's doublefold. The first one is it is those activities that it doesn't exist a technological solution economically viable to transform them, make them reach net zero. And at the same time, they have a replacement. So they are not essential in our economy. For me, are the real stranded assets. And from a supervisory regulatory perspective, identifying stranded assets is really important for financial institutions, for financial stability purposes, but also to give that time in advance for them to progressively get rid of those in an orderly manner. But the second reason is because it seems to me that in the whole discourse around net zero and carbon neutrality, the elephant in the room is what we're going to do with all the assets and activities that have no place. And I think we need to start having that discussion and rewarding the decommissioning of those plans, of those activities. And by creating or identifying the always significant harmful, if we do it in an intelligent manner, that is not to blame and shame, but it is to reward the decommissioning instead of just passing it to somebody else, then maybe, we could, really progress to reach, that net zero. So I will put my, emphasis when we expand it to that. And then, of course, social. But social it is complicated because there is less consensus on what is a substantial contribution from a social objective and how to measure it. So maybe we should learn first from the environmental one and then move into the social. But it's certainly needed at some point. Until then, I think that one of the priorities in the social angle should be to harmonize the understanding of how you implement the UN guiding principles on business and human rights and the OECD multinational guidelines, and making consistent across the entire sustainable finance package.
Oh, thank you very much for these insights, Helena. That's very valuable. Indeed, it seems to me that identifying the significantly harmful activities and then also probably fleshing out those that do not have any significant impact on the environment, we could indeed complement the framework. And what would be actually left in between would be the so-called amber intermediate zone, right? And to what extent do you think such framework could also somehow maybe help companies in terms of creating their net zero pathways, enabling to design and draw this, kind of transition pathway that could also enable investors to better understand where companies are on the, I would say, transition pathway, and also compare them across other companies from similar sectors. And do you think there is maybe a need for, I don't know, designing certain sectorial kind of pathways and trying to deconstruct in a way, I would say, this big goal we have now to achieve the net zero by 2050. But I think there is quite a bit of debate among the companies, but also financial market participants, that in a way the challenge is that probably for companies from different sectors, these pathways, and by how much can you effectively, or you should lower your carbon emissions year by year. Yes, it might be quite subject to what kind of activities you're engaged in. What are your views on that?
I will start with one precision. So I think that the priority as said, is on the always significant harmful for the reasons I mentioned before. Yeah. In terms of the rest, I think that it's interesting because in a way we already have the amber and the red. What we don't have is that this thing, we do, because the minute you have the do no significant harm and the substantial contribution thresholds, everything in between is the amber. Yeah. It's just that for climate mitigation is very obvious in most cases when you use a quantitative threshold, like is the case, for example, for power generation. You have 100 grams of CO2 and then 270, so everything in between. But it's not so obvious when it's qualitative, yeah? And this goes back to my point of we need to now try to guide or translate some of the qualitative criteria in where possible quantitative or process-based, or at least provide some guidance on how to judge them, and how to assess them. I'm not so sure we need the never significant, like it doesn't significantly contribute nor harm, in the sense if we have the always significant harmful and we have, do no significant contribution, we already have those, yeah? And one of the reasons why I was always a little bit cautious of creating, and I put it with inverted commas, these neutral taxonomy, activities that they are neutral, it's because that refers to the actual activity. So, for example, I am a marketing company, yeah? So, yes, marketing is neutral, unless obviously I market, I don't know, fossil fuels or whatever it is. But I still, as a company, I still need my transition plan. And I still can do a lot, and I can still use the taxonomy to, for example, renovate the building where my offices are, the fleet, changing my electricity provider. So I ensure that it comes from renewable sources. All companies need a transition plan, even if for some it's quite, like simple and probably easy to reach there. But still worth to really identify the always significant harmful. Also because I heard it before people saying, well, if you're not in the taxonomy, actually it's a good thing because it means that you don't need to really reduce your emissions, to do that. And we keep forgetting that some activities that they are not is because they're always significant harmful. So I think that it will really provide clarity. In terms of the advantages, we talked before about, I think companies should be supported in their decommissioning and supported in moving away. And that's one way. It's by being able to identify and then, raise capital raise finance in the capital market. But it's also, you mentioned the rest of the potential expansion of the taxonomy. The amber, I think it's very important. And particularly when it comes to CapEx. You heard me before, Aleksandra, I am a big fan of CapEx. I honestly think it's the biggest contribution of the taxonomy in a way, and the biggest misunderstanding of how it works. Because those companies who are in the red space, so imagine we're talking about power generation, their plants are produce electricity, emitting more than the 270. Yeah? But if they invest, imagine a company that has two plants, yeah, and then invests in reducing it to, let's say, 200 or 150, they're not yet in the green part, but they have substantially reduced their emissions, then, that investments can be, recognized that they move from the red zone to the amber. And that also can, help raise funds for those improvements. So I am very keen on the amber, particularly when it comes to the CapEx, recognizing that. And I think that it doesn't even need to be in the legislation. I think that companies could describe, right, in their CapEx plans, for whatever reason they might imagine there is a technological reason why they cannot yet, reach that less than 100, then they could say, look, this is what we're doing. First, we're moving into the amber. These are the reasons, yeah? And then we'll move into the other. I think investors would appreciate that and will have, confidence or trust into that company, especially if it's part of a bigger transition plan, to reach net zero, and it makes perfect, and it's detailed and it makes sense.
You've mentioned that we are currently at the stage where, kind of early stages of the taxonomy implementation, which probably is one of the most challenging moments for the companies trying to become compliant with the rules and to implement them. Certain companies complain about the complexity of the EU taxonomy and how much it costs them to find solutions and get advice on how to implement. What would be your message for this kind of companies? I mean, as a kind of, also, I don't know, looking into the years to come. And also overall, I would say looking back at your experience within the platform on sustainable finance and tech, what would you say are the main achievements and successes of the group and the EU taxonomy overall?
On the companies, yeah? I think that now it's going to be a very interesting moment, because I think now one of the main things that we need to do is this. It's what I call the ants work, like ants, yeah, which is the tiny little steps, which is really providing so many companies across Europe with helping them to interpret the taxonomy in the sense of the activity, which activities actually are included or not, is not so easy. I mean, you would be surprised some of the questions that that companies ask, because sometimes it's not obvious whether or not certain products fall into the taxonomy or not. I mean, being eligible, let alone then aligned, right? And then on interpreting the criteria, on assessing whether or not they meet. I think there is, at the very beginning, it's going to need a lot of guidance, and probably it will require a lot of FAQs on behalf of the European Commission with the support of the platform. In the regulation, Aleksandra, that a lot of the do no significant harm criteria is based on regulations and on qualitative. And there a lot of words: reducing, minimizing, near, yeah? So what does mean near? Is it 1 kilometer, or is it 5 kilometers? So all of this needs a lot of refining, and it's just guidance, yeah? Guidance for the companies. In terms of the data usability group, the successes, I think that one of the biggest successes was to put on the table and start the work on consistency and coherence I was mentioning, yeah? Is that taking one step back and then looking at the different pieces of regulation. We look at CSRD, SFRD, benchmarks, and ESG preference with the taxonomy regulation, and then, make proposal to make it more coherent. Like one of, for example, things that we identify is that there are 4 different definitions, even if the principle is the same, of do no significant harm. What does that mean? How can we move it forward? Secondly is give CapEx the place it deserves. Yes, I think that there's not enough understanding on how CapEx, places a central role in helping companies and other economic actors to access the capital they need to the transition. Yeah, and so there's a lot of need to make people understand how it works and how they can benefit. And the report, I think, Data Usability Group has made a big contribution on that. The third one would be, we put on the table different cases. So one of the things we realize is that, once again, the taxonomy is the overall reference, yeah? But then it depends who uses and for what, that might need little adjustments. And we have identified 3 particular special cases: SMEs, investments in developing countries and development finance, and then public finance. For each one of these, much more work needs to be done and some adjustments needed. For example, when you make an investment in the middle of, I don't know, like in the middle of Africa, and your do no significant harm, is related to the management of waste. If there's no waste management proper infrastructure, you might not meet that criteria. And so should that be an impediment or not? We need to provide, because I think that we need to be careful that the taxonomy doesn't become a barrier for investing where it's most needed. Yeah. But at the same time, you don't want, you need to be able to, to control it and maintain the ambition of the taxonomy. SMEs, there's a big question mark about, SMEs. For the time being, only listed SMEs are included in the ratios of financial institutions, but we wish SMEs can also access green finance. So, but what does it mean in terms of the reporting? Are they really able to meet the criteria? Yes or no, more work needs to be done, even if the platform has done a lot. And something similar happens with public finance. There are differences, but still, imagine, Aleksandra, that it's the same company that on one hand is required to meet the taxonomy requirements in terms of our access in green finance, but then in terms of a national state procurement, green procurement rules, is asked different criteria, right? Shouldn't it have, be consistent, yeah? And what does that mean? So once again, more work needs. And then lastly, I think it has been on the international considerations, but then a lot of work on and a lot of suggestions and recommendations to the European Commission on how to make the EU more internationally friendly. At the same time, on how to work towards a common framework between different taxonomies. And finally, I would say to demonstrate the importance of estimates and how estimates are misunderstood. There are many different types of estimates. Most companies will use certain level of estimates in order to calculate their own emissions. Estimates don't need to mean they're needed. It's just a question of how can we really set up a framework with strict and clear criteria to make sure those estimates are based on real information and that they're solid. And it's the only way forward for financial institutions to be able to report on the totality of their portfolios.
That's very helpful. And actually, speaking of estimates, I have one question. Could you also share here with the audience what is actually here the final, say, at least for now, in terms of the rules and the guidance on allowing the estimates? And also, I mean, there has been quite a bit of, I think, debate about the different wording used, for instance, in terms of estimates, but also what is meant as equivalent information. Could you shed some light on that?
Absolutely. It's just that, as for everyone to know, this is very much on the making, yeah? And it's very much the debate right now. When it comes to taxonomy and when it comes to reporting taxonomy alignment at entity level for financial institutions. Okay, so for those who are little geeks in terms of the EU regulation, it refers to the delegated act on Article 8 of the taxonomy regulation. Estimates today are not allowed. You have to use the information provided, directly from companies on taxonomy alignment. Yet, there's an article, it's under Article 7, if I recall correctly, 7.4, yeah, if I recall correctly, but basically says that subject to revision, a revision that is scheduled for mid-2024, estimates might be allowed for non-CSRD companies. So those companies that they don't have to report, from a mandatory point of view. So this refers to the entity level. Now, for financial products, what is allowed is the use of equivalent information that you just mentioned. Now, what equivalent information is yet to be defined, because it's the responsibility of the ESAs to, define exactly what equivalent information should be. Now, what the platform, the data usability, did is put forward a proposal of what we think, equivalent information should be. And then we added that we think that revision of schedule for mid 2024 should use the same definition and framework that equivalent information, so there is consistency.
Great, thank you so much. I think we could, talk on that for hours, but now moving on to a kind of a more global level debate. You serve as a member of the UN Secretary General High-Level Expert Group on Net Zero Pledges. What differences have you observed in terms of the approach to sustainable finance at the global level compared to the EU? Does Europe tend to be more ambitious? And if yes, do you think Europe has become a de facto leader of sustainable finance, helping drive the global ambition?
I think the short answer is yes, Europe is, without any doubt, the leader. I mean, probably with the exception of the UK, but clearly the UK has been directly influenced by the EU, and we're part of it, of the construction of it for a while. You wouldn't find anywhere, at least that I know, any sustainable finance regulatory framework as comprehensive and as ambitious as the EU. And the perfect example is the taxonomy, which the EU, again, as far as I know, is the only one that requires, that is mandatory, both at financial product level and at entity level, to report on alignment. Is the only one that has that. And interestingly enough, is the only one that has CapEx, right? And a lot of times we talk about this transitioning, the colors, the traffic lights, taxonomies. And while I think that in the future we should definitely, as we discussed previously, work probably and the expansion of the taxonomy is not as needed as in other places, because we have the CapEx. And CapEx, helps a company that is 0% aligned with the taxonomy from the revenue perspective to invest, to transform itself and be 100% CapEx alignment and attract capital through the CapEx. So I think it is, again, a big step forward. But moving away from the taxonomy, what it makes it really leadership is that not only the sustainable finance package is extraordinarily comprehensive, and we said it before, includes all the actors alongside the value chain. It is also revolutionary in terms of the governing principles. The Sustainable Finance Package has put on the table three key principles, in my view. The first one is do no significant harm, and do no significant harm to other environmental objectives. So really introducing the trade-offs between environmental objectives and how that is so needed. And let's be honest, the financial industry had not been very good at dealing with the trade-offs, but also do no significant harm, in terms of the social impact. And I think that's really important. The second principle is the double materiality. It's a key. It has truly moved in a way. What it has made is that we effectively are moving away from a model that is exclusively centered on shareholders, so the shareholder model, to a more of a stakeholder model. And I think that is a big change, and that is what shows, that real transformation, where basically what we're saying is that where you talk about shareholders, where you talk about companies and the different institutions, there is a responsibility towards society and the environment, yeah, and it's part of the duties. I think that is a massive, change that I have not yet, again, seen elsewhere. I guess, and I'll finish with this, the challenge for Europe would be, on one hand, how to make its whole package internationally friendly and operational, right? And at the same time maintaining the level of ambition, yeah, and helping others to raise the bar elsewhere, yeah. We will be succeed. And particularly in the short term, I think that the current context is not very helpful because there are calls for slowing down, on the ground, and their arguments saying, well, in order to preserve the competitiveness of our industry, we should lower the requirements for companies and financial institutions. And I think it is a point of view that maybe it works for the very short term, but it definitely goes against, the long-term interest of the industry itself, because we know that in the long term, and I would say medium term, it is, the competitiveness of the European industry, yes, and that competitive advantage is going to be precisely on, based on sustainability and the sustainable finance. I think this is where Europe has a real competitive edge.
Thank you so much, Helena. This has been a very insightful conversation. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your valuable experience and views.
It brings us to the end of this insightful conversation and the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for listening. Do not hesitate to like, follow and share this episode of Sustainability Bridges. EuroCIF will continue in the next episode to bridge the gap between the policymaking and the practice of sustainable investing with the help of distinguished guests. In the meantime, please visit our website and follow us on social media to stay tuned. See you next time for a new episode of Sustainability Bridges.